personal experience and about echoing green. But one of the things that I think is so remarkable about her in general is the fact that she is a social entrepreneur herself. So she's kind of walked that walk and taken that journey, having founded a mobile health clinic for kind of lower income people residing in the Boston area during her residency at Harvard Medical School. So she also has a very interesting and varied background. And she's really kind of we did a work on purpose training this fall, and we got a chance to read some of the fellow stories in this book that Echoing Green put together, and Cheryl's is really touching about how she really connected with her purpose, and that's something that we really are trying to explore much more in the program on social entrepreneurship. So I won't go into too much detail. Cheryl has been at the helm of Echoing Green for, is it 13 years and counting? A little bit?
14
14 and counting, and she's really led the organization and helped it scale up so much during her tenure there. Echoing Green has over 700 social entrepreneurs in their community, and I think they've invested over $35 million, so that's really substantial within the field. And I will just mention Cheryl is the recipient of a prestigious White House fellowship, touching on a lot of public service, which is something that we do a lot here at Stanford. And she's a graduate of Harvard Medical School, the Harvard Kennedy School, and Harvard Radcliffe College, too. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Cheryl. And I want to thank you so much from the bottom of our heart for being here tonight and closing this series for the fall quarter.
Awesome. Thanks. Thank you, Serena. Thank you, Serena, so much. We've gotten to know each other through your leadership at the center and through your work with the Sears program. And as I think you'll hear in my remarks, social entrepreneurship is not just about incredible social entrepreneurs like Rob and Jem and others, but increasingly about building out the ecosystem of support for the work of social innovation, and the work that you did at Synergos and now here at Stanford is part and parcel of that. So thank you. It's been great. So, and thank you to Sensa. Thank you guys for having me. I hope I don't disappoint. It's a subject I'm passionate about and I'm excited to talk to you guys about, but I have decided, and I'm putting my colleagues and community on the spot. I want my posse to join in this conversation, so I want the chorus to speak up, and that includes one of my bosses who's sitting quietly over there, Carter McClellan, raise your hand, Carter, who has been an extraordinary leader, helping Echoing Green grow and continue to flourish, especially out here in the Bay Area. Carter is new to the board, a very accomplished investment professional, founder of Union Square Ventures. My colleague, Teresa Vasquez, who's our Vice President of Development, who's got a background in CDFI work and in the Bloomberg administration in New York City, who is my partner in crime in trying to build out the financial sustainability of Echoing Green. And as Serena mentioned, two folks I'm so proud to be in community with, two Echoing Green fellows, Rob Gittin and Gemma Boulos, who make the work of Echoing Green possible and continue to inspire so many next-gen leaders like you guys here. So, guys, please join in. Correct me when I misstate something, but let's get down to business. Okay, so I actually spent a lot of time. I was trying to be really thoughtful about what I talk to you guys about. Let me lay it out for you, and if something doesn't strike you as sort of the right direction, I can shift. But at the end of our time together, before we open it up to Q&A, I would sort of love to talk about Echoing Green's sort of definition and approach to social entrepreneurship and why we think it's such an impactful strategy for positive social change. So that's one thing. I want to dig in on Echoing Green's particular model for social innovation, how we do what we do and why we do what we do and why we think it works. Talk to you a little bit about our metrics that allow us to stand up here and talk about why we think it's a great approach to social innovation, why social entrepreneurship is ascendant at the moment, sort of what's in the ether, what's out there to make this hopefully not a fad or just a trend of the moment, but something more substantive and lasting. And then last but not least, maybe a little bit about my personal journey, how I ended up standing before you guys today, and why it may or may not be instructive for your journeys as emerging leaders. Does that sound good to everybody? Yeah, is there anything else you really want to make sure that I cover in our time together before we open it up to Q&A? Some burning questions, some burning thoughts, something you got to ask Echoing Green while we're out here on your coast? Okay, and I hate talking at people. It just gets boring for me. So if you guys want to interject, interrupt, redirect, sort of let's have a conversation. Okay. So let me start off by sort of echoing Green's very macro definition and thinking around social entrepreneurship. So from Echoing Green's perspective, we believe that social entrepreneurship is both an aggressive and an audacious strategy for social change. It encompasses a range of actors and activities whose ultimate aim is transformational and sustainable positive social change. So that's sort of a lot in there, right? Let's unpack that a little bit. If you get underneath that sort of big, bold idea around what social entrepreneurship means to the world, I think there are 4 key pillars that undergird that statement. Okay, so the first one is this idea that social entrepreneurship as a practice is really at its core about this idea of blurring the boundaries between civil society, the the state, and the marketplace. So what does that mean? It means that when you practice social entrepreneurship at its best, when it's really functioning at a high level, it's cross-sectoral. It's not about any one sector sort of working its levers. Again, it's cross-sectoral. There's a level of comfort with complexity and recognizing that in the 21st century, the challenges that you guys as next-gen leaders will have to confront and hopefully solve are going to require action, engagement across sector, and having all actors at the table. McKinsey sort of talks about this notion of tri-sector leadership, and I assume that in your careers, you will spend time sort of diffusing between the sectors, spending some of your careers in the market, some in the political realm and public service, and some in the social sector, and that will be the new normal for you guys in a way that it wasn't for my generation. I think the second point around that definition is that social entrepreneurship is about having an entrepreneurial mindset, but it's an entrepreneurial mindset plus, right? So what does that mean? It means that the actors who are engaged in these activities are striving for value creation, but it's not just about economic value creation. It's about economic and social value creation. At the end of the day, social entrepreneurship is about, at its highest calling, about creating more shared prosperity. That's really what it's about. Sort of the third pillar is that when social entrepreneurship is in the zone, when it's working the way that it's supposed to work, it is really about the disruption of the status quo. There's a historian, a guy named Chester Starr, who once wrote that for new ideas to have a chance, the old systems have to be so turbulently shaken that they lose their dominance. That's what social entrepreneurship as a tool is all about. And when you all, I'm sure some of you are at the business school and you sort of learn about entrepreneurship as a moment of creative destruction, social entrepreneurship also falls in the lane of being a disruptive force, one of the most disruptive forces that we know. And last but not least, social entrepreneurship in its audacity is about sort of a rate and type of change that is transformational and not incremental. One of my favorite definitions about what social innovation is this idea that you've got process and product innovations that lead not to incremental improvements in a system's performance, but dramatic improvements in a system's performance. So what does that mean? And I apologize if I'm being too jargony. So what does it mean as it plays out all day, every day? So if you happen to start a dropout prevention program in your community, an incremental change might be an intervention that improves graduation rates for maybe beyond 10% beyond the norm of existing programs. That's incremental change, that's good, but transformational change, disruptive change would be an intervention that would lead to improvements in graduation rates in excess of 30% versus the norm, right? That's the level of transformation that we're talking about around social innovation and social entrepreneurship. So that's sort of the contextual space in which I'll now talk about Echoing Green and our particular play and brand of social entrepreneurship. Can I ask how many people have heard of Echoing Green? Okay, all right, so I have some education to do, so this is good, getting in front of a new audience. So Echoing Green, as best we can tell, was the second or third earliest founded funder of social entrepreneurs. We were founded in 1987, and essentially we are angel investors in the social sector. It is our job in the world of social innovation to go out into the world, identify next-gen emerging leaders who've got innovative new ideas for social change, and provide a little bit of seed capital, technical support, and access to our network to allow those ideas to flourish. So that's Echoing Green. So how do we do our work? So we go out into the world every year and we launch an annual global social business plan competition. And we just ask, if you got a new idea, like Rob had, Gemma had, Tomas had, and you're looking for some support in the earliest stages, you sort of submit something to Echoing Green, and through a pretty rigorous 5 to 6 month due diligence process, we as staff and as a community learn more about your idea and ultimately select a small number of those who apply for funding and support. So just to give you a sense of the scale of Echoing Green, each year we get a couple thousand applications. Last year, for example, we got about 3,300 submissions from around 154 countries around the world. And at the end of, again, a months-long due diligence process, ultimately invested in only 38 new enterprises. So it's pretty tough to run the gauntlet of the Echoing Green selection process. But we think that through this vetting process that we run emerging social entrepreneurs through, it's a good quality control process for follow-on funders, and it's good for you all as early stage social entrepreneurs who constantly have to pressure test your ideas, sort of iterate your business model, and make the case for why you and your idea deserve support. So we think sort of the structure that we've created for our social business plan competition allows you to constantly improve your idea and your thinking through the process. So we're pretty proud of it. All right, so what does sort of the panoply of Echoing Green inputs look like? We actually sort of think our value chain is pretty robust. It starts with a search and selection process, and I'll talk about that. And then it's about supporting the fellows that we ultimately fund. And then it's about sort of creating a global community of both currently funded fellows and alumni that continue to go on and engage in social change in a lot of different ways. So let's break each of those components of the value chain down. So the search and selection process. So we spend a lot of our resources building partnerships, doing outreach to communities, bless you, communities around the world, asking those communities to send our way or to identify emerging leaders who are looking for early stage support. And who might be able to benefit from Echoing Green's assistance. We do that through our alums like Gemma and Rob and others who know folks in their communities who they think have what it takes to become Echoing Green Fellows, and they refer. We work with nonprofit organizations who are in communities who are seeing early stage talent at work and send folks our way. Increasingly, obviously, through social media, through the internet and other outreach channels, we have the ability to draw in folks who are aggressively looking for seed capital technical support. So we think we really worked hard to build sort of a range of global ambassadors who help draw in people into our network. So we do that, and then I guess, the next logical question is then how do you select them? What do you guys look for? I do think there's something about the alchemy or the magic of investing in entrepreneurs, and some of it is you sort of sit across the table from someone and you kind of know it when you see it. You sort of get that feeling like, wow, this is someone I really want to back. We have tried to be a little more methodical and start to codify that wow factor. What does it mean to Echoing Green to want to invest in that kind of leader? And so there's sort of 8 qualities that I want to walk you guys quickly through that sort of serve as our template for screening these young next-gen leaders. So there are 4 characteristics that really relate to the human capital, to the talent, to the social entrepreneur, and then 4 characteristics that we use to screen sort of the idea, the business plan, all that kind of stuff. And I will say we really privilege the talent. We're looking at the entrepreneur, the leader, and why we want to back that person and their visionary potential. So 4 qualities. First is purpose and passion. So at the end of the day, this work is really hard, and it's sort of, why do you do what you do? What gets you out of bed in the morning, and what keeps you going through the inevitable difficulties, failures, sort of difficulties of doing any kind of positive social change work? So we look at the level of purpose and passion as sort of catalytic fuel that will really drive this person through the darkest days of doing this work. Second thing is something we talk about, perspective and resilience. I hope you guys in all of your classes and in some of your extracurriculars talk a lot about, failure and how hard it is to do really tough things. I think increasingly, and especially with you, overachievers, you millennials, where you're so successful, you're so smart, you're so bright, that we've done a terrible job in shaming failure. We sort of raise you up and your achievements up, but really sort of marginalize the notion that you mess up sometimes and things are going to go really wrong and you're really going to fuck some things up. And that should be okay. We got to normalize that, right? And so what we love about Echoing Green is this notion of resiliency. And it's not that you fall down, it's how do you get back up and how do you walk through the difficult days. So that's really important. The third characteristic is something we call point of entry in leadership. And again, that's probably a little too jargony, but for us it means at the end of the day, we're not looking for just really terrific, smart folks, lots of those out there in society. We're looking for a particular type of leader, a transformational leader, at the end of the day, a social movement leader. Most people who are engaged in social change work day in and day out, this is generational, it's difficult, it's about collaboration, it's about working in a collective space, and there has to be something about embedding yourself in larger social movements. And that means you need to be able to cooperate, you need to be able to collaborate, you need to inspire and make evangelists of a lot of folks in your community because you never have enough resources as an individual or as an individual organization. So your ability to sort of help others come along with you for the journey is super duper important, which leads me to the fourth characteristic, which at Echoing Green we talk about what's your power source. There's a term we use called resource magnetism, and it's different than charisma. It's the stickiness of the leader. It's sort of at the end of a cocktail party when everyone is sort of like congealed around Rob or Gemma or Tomas. That's the stickiness of a leader. People have the ability to draw you in and ignite your interest, and you become as engaged in what they're doing and want to learn more, want to be engaged, you want to write them checks, you want to volunteer for them, you want to provide media attention so the rest of the world will know about their story. That's resource magnetism. And again, it's very different than charisma, but it's sort of a sticky quality, these leaders. So those are the four qualities that I think we've gotten very good at sussing out amongst our community of social entrepreneurs. But then you do have to look at the business plan, right? Because it's got to be more than just the leadership qualities. So the four things we look for is innovation, right? So Echoing Green really does believe that innovation is a very powerful tool for disrupting the status quo and for changing things in community. And the example I like to use is every year we get a lot of submissions from young leaders like you who really care about ed reform. You guys have really been on the front lines of making ed reform one of the leading civil rights issues of the day. And we get a lot of proposals for next-gen leaders who want to start new schools, right? Echoing Green doesn't believe that is our job to fund. There are funders like New Schools Venture Funds. There are big foundations like Walton Family Foundation who will invest in more schools to help close the achievement gap. What Echoing Green is looking for are game-changing new models that could really disrupt the way ed reform activities are being done. And the example I like to use are two 1998 Echoing Green fellows, Raj Vinakota and Eric Adler, who started the Seed School. There are now three of them, but in 1998 they founded the Seed School in Washington, D.C., which at the time was our nation's first urban boarding public school. There was a lot of stuff in there. So basically, people over the years had tried to start urban boarding schools in distressed communities with the idea that kids at risk were being impacted by their surroundings in very profound ways, and the idea of sort of wrapping them in a holistic environment, in a college boarding school, college prep boarding school environment would be a really great strategy to help these kids succeed and get to college. But no one could figure out the financing model. It's really super expensive because it's not just about educating the kid. You need sort of the cost to cover the bricks and mortar of a college preparatory boarding school. Raj and Eric figured out how to put the financing together. by both changing public policy at the local level in Washington, D.C. to shift per pupil funding to underwrite the cost of kids going to an urban college preparatory boarding school. But they also engineered from Bank of America, your former haunt, Bank of America at the time, provided them with the largest nonprofit loan for capital expenditures to build a state-of-the-art urban college prep boarding school in Anacostia, which is in the southeast section of Washington, D.C. So hopefully that gives you a sense of, again, the transformative nature of these ideas as opposed to another marginal incremental improvement in a particular realm. So that's innovation. The next thing is the idea important, right? There are lots of problems in the world. There are lots of ways that we all should be engaged as global citizens, but we've got relatively few dollars to invest, so we're looking for folks who are tackling some of the biggest, toughest, hairiest problems in society, and we want to invest in the leader who we think is really taking on an important issue. The third is there a potential for big, bold impact? You know, a lot of philanthropic capital is deployed to sort of mitigating or ameliorating problems. So you do really good work in community, but it's not ever about solving the problem at hand. At its core, social entrepreneurs are solutionists, right? They're audaciously going out there, not just to make a problem slightly better, but ultimately to solve it. And that's what Echoing Green is looking for. And then last but not least, do you have a good business plan? We know at the earliest stages, business plans are often fictional documents, and they're only as relevant as the day of the week. And if you're a really good, thoughtful entrepreneur, you will iterate that plan. It will change based on feedback that comes to you, based on new thinking, and that is as it should be. But there's some discipline to putting together a business plan. Did you think about your staffing needs? Did you think about budgetary considerations? Are you thinking about how you're going to build a sustainable organization and model? So those are all the things that we look for. So if you run that gauntlet and become an Echoing Green Fellow, then what happens? Then it's about how do we support you. And Echoing Green has a really, I think, thoughtful theory of change around how do you support next-gen leaders. We think it's not just about money. And I should say, Echoing Green doesn't provide that much money. We provide 80 to 90 grand over 2 years to help you start your enterprise. But I would say the money is important in two regards. It's early stage and it's high risk. So at a time when you're sort of going out there sort of hustling for startup dough, and if you guys have done it, you know how hard it is to get it because you don't have a track record, you don't have a sustainable model yet, and you really do need people who will take the risk and take that leap with you. Echoing Green's money matters for that reason. And then secondly, also, it's unrestricted support. For those of you who sort of wade into the philanthropic marketplace, it's really a little wacky and a little dysfunctional, and quite often money will go to project-based support, which is when you're starting something, you need the most flexible, most leverageable capital. And Echoing Green looks at you guys and says, you know, you're smart, thoughtful, next-gen leaders. You know best how to deploy your capital. So if you can make the case for why we should invest in you, have at it, deploy it any way you like. So I think that's super important. The second thing is we do our work, and none of our fellowship colleagues are here with us, but we have portfolio managers who work with a cohort of fellows, and they matter to our fellows for 4 or 5 reasons. They served as accountability partners for our fellows. You know, again, when you're starting something new, it's overwhelming. You got 1,000 things to do every day. You only have the capacity to do 10 of those things, and you're constantly just trying to move your idea down the field. Having an accountability partner who will check in with you and say, you said you were going to do this, did you do that? And you promised you were going to do this, did you do it? So that kind of accountability mechanism is super duper important. You also need just sort of a confidant, someone who you can sort of talk to in a trusted space when the going gets rough. And again, when you are failing, because you will fail, and having someone to share that with is super important. Our portfolio managers, if you ever have the occasion to meet them, are smart generalists. If you're starting a sustainable agricultural organization, they don't necessarily know a whole lot about sustainable ag, but they know a whole lot about how do you think about board development? How do you think about making a pitch to an investor? And having that kind of partner for that journey is really, really important. And then last but not least, sort of the third stool of our model is this idea of being embedded in a larger community. And I mean, maybe Gemma and Rob, you guys can talk about this. Echoing Green, I think, is a particularly powerful model of social innovation. We don't have the most money. We don't have the most fellows in our network, but boy, is our network sticky. I've used that word before. It's very sticky. We're very devoted to one another. Fellows who come through the same year are sort of peers and family for life, but we're also sort of connected to one another across the years of the fellowship. And having that both bonding capital and bridging capital to help you think through all of the tough things you go through as a social entrepreneur, I think is unparalleled and really sort of sets Echoing Green apart. Is there anything you guys would add about the community piece? I know I totally put you on the spot, but
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo what you were saying. It's amazing. I think from day one, when you're part of Echoing Green, you feel really privileged. You feel like it's an honor. And when you start a nonprofit, you get exposed to a lot of different communities of people. It's one of the best kind of secondary benefits of doing it is you get access to really brilliant and inspiring people. But there's no community that compares to that Going Green community in terms of just how inspiring and motivating it is. And having a group of like-minded people who each have their own passion, but we all have a shared framework of what we're trying to accomplish from an organizational standpoint. It sustains you during the dark moments, and there are a lot of dark moments, and it kind of buoys you and encourages you when you're doing well. So I think of the various things that Echoing Green provides, it's the peer community that really stands out.
thanks, Rob. Gemma?
I agree. I mean, I'm a 2007 fellow, so we got our fellowship almost 8 years ago. And we have, my class actually still meets every single year. We bonded so well that every year we organize our own retreats. And we come together with issues that we have in our organizations, and we think through them through an entire weekend of eating and hanging out and singing karaoke, and then solve our organizational problems. And I think what's exciting about this network is that, once an Echoing Green, always an Echoing Green fellow. I mean, I can call someone from 1992 and say, I'm an Echoing Green fellow from 2007, and they will immediately pick up my call. They will immediately. And I think what bonds us the most is that because we're doing such challenging work, because we're challenging the status quo, and because we're all kind of experiencing this sort of same organizational challenges, we can't often go to our families or our friends who won't know what we're going through, but we can go to our fellow fellows. And they're the first ones to be able to talk you off the roof and be able to just sort of walk you through what they know is a dark time because they've been there too.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, it's the community element. I think it really does set our model apart. And so I've talked a little bit about our model, our theory of change. And so I guess I always get this question when I'm talking to classes like this. Well, how do you measure your success? How do you know that you're good at what you do? And there are a number of different dimensions along which we sort of slice and dice this evaluation component. So narratively, again, most of you have never heard of Echoing Green, but we've now funded about 700 social entrepreneurs. You will know a lot of the organizations that have come through our portfolio. So, for example, we were early funders of Teach for America and Wendy Kopp when she graduated from Princeton in the late 80s. If you're familiar with other national service organizations like City Year, we funded the two co-founders of City Year, Alan Casey and Michael Brown. We funded someone you may have heard of, Michelle Obama, who started the Chicago Office of Public Allies right after she left corporate law in Chicago. So we've had a really profound effect in sort of seeding the generation of leaders who built the national service movement. We have funded across the spectrum. We're agnostic funders, but I would say national service is where we've had a particularly good track record. And in addition, we've done, I think, a really good job of funding some of the world's best emerging human rights and workers' rights leaders. And it's interesting because I think, especially from your perch at Stanford, my sense would be that you probably see a lot of social innovators coming out of the design school using sort of technology applications, microfinance models. Echoing Green, because we are agnostic in nature and we're sort of looking for innovations in all of its guises, and because we do early stage risk capital, have been sort of this interesting magnet for social innovation in the human rights and workers' rights spaces. So everyone from Sarah Horowitz, a labor lawyer by training, who started something called Working Today, which really has revolutionized how we provide health benefits in society to our increasingly contractual and contingent workforce. So that's just one example. So, you know, other folks in the Bay Area or who started their careers here, you know, people like Van Jones, who was funded by Echoing Green to start a anti-police brutality hotline in Oakland back in the mid-90s. It was the first legal organization to use that model. Van then went on to found the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights here in Oakland and wrote a New York Times bestseller on sort of the green jobs economy and economic development in distressed communities, and briefly served as the green jobs czar in the Obama administration. And now if you watch CNN, if you guys have the time, is one of the pundits, one of the progressive pundits who talks about a whole range of issues. So again, we've been very good at identifying some of the top talent, but I know maybe for some of you, you're like the numbers. What are the metrics? What are the metrics to show that you guys are good at what you do? So I've got a variety of measures, and maybe we can have a conversation about how compelling these stats are to you. So about 85% of the leaders in whom we've invested remain in the social sector and key leadership positions. And, you know, we think that's a darn good statistic to show that we are building out a really powerful pipeline of talent that is committed to trying to take on and solve some of the world's greatest challenges. And these are folks who could work in any realm, any sector, but they've chosen to dedicate the bulk of their careers and dedicate their intellectual capital to solving some of the world's toughest problems. So we're really proud of being a key talent pipeline into the social sector. We're really good in terms of identifying businesses that are sustainable. About 67% of the enterprises in which we invest are sustainable in the short, medium, and long term. And you guys know as well as I do, most new businesses fail. It's hard to start up and maintain new businesses. Echoing Green has got a really good sustainability rate. Rob's been at it since the mid-90s. The program that I founded through Echoing Green has been at it since 92. We think that's a really important measure. And then Serena mentioned that we're a small fund. We're closer now to have invested about $40 million into these 700 or so social entrepreneurs, but they've gone on to raise an additional $5 billion in public and private dollars. That's an extraordinary leverage effect. That's a huge return on investment from a very small $40 million to $5 billion being deployed for the public good. So we think that is one indicator. We also have crunched some numbers, and in Silicon Valley here, you guys probably hear the language all the time about incubators and accelerators and how do you sort of create these communities to help entrepreneurs go farther, faster. We did some of that number crunching and looked at a couple classes of our fellows, the 2011 class and the 2012 class of social entrepreneurs, which comprise 58 young leaders. We made an investment in them of about $2.4 million collectively. Again, not a lot of money, but when we looked at the outcomes and how far they had progressed within the 2 years of their fellowship, they had raised an additional about $29 million in that short period of time. And where they had started out with about 58 individuals trying to set up these social enterprises, within a couple of years, they were employing in excess of 640 people. So that's huge ROI. That's like an 11x increase in terms of both dollars raised and employees supported through these very early stage enterprises. And then the last sort of stat or filter I'll use is a couple years ago, we employed some very smart graduate students to come in and look at the difference that we thought Echoing Green made. So if you got an Echoing Green fellowship versus those who sort of made it to the final rounds of the fellowship program, what happened once you were either selected as an Echoing Green fellow or once we said, you're terrific, but sorry, you're not for Echoing Green, and you sort of went off and did your own thing. And really found some very interesting data. So fully 40% of those who made it to the finals of the Echoing Green selection process, we thought they were good enough to fly them in from all over the world and to interview them over the course of a weekend, but they just didn't quite make it to the fellowship level. Fully 40% of those finalists that we sent home never went on to sort of start their idea. So those ideas died on the vine. And we could have a conversation. It was probably good. We probably have too many people starting social enterprises. So it's probably a good idea that some ultimately didn't start these social enterprises. But we think that there was sort of a live or die moment based on Echoing Green's intervention. But for those who did go on to start their enterprises without Echoing Green support, we saw that they lagged across 7 different organizational metrics compared to Echoing Green Fellows. They didn't sort of stand up their boards in quite as a robust manner as Echoing Green Fellows. They didn't raise as much money as Echoing Green Fellows. They didn't garner as much media attention or other opportunities to talk about their ideas in the press as Echoing Green Fellows. So in a statistically significant way, we had data to show that Echoing Green's intervention made a pretty distinctive difference in the earliest stages, which is what you want for an incubator and accelerator of note. So those are some of the metrics that we use to talk about the work. So quickly, let me run through some of the trends that we're seeing at Echoing Green, because when you think about it, when you get thousands of business plans every year, you start to see some really interesting trends develop, and maybe we can talk more about this. So one is this whole notion of impact investing. So I've been around the Echoing Green community for many years. I got my fellowship back in 1992, and we were a pretty traditional investor in not-for-profit social enterprises until 2006, 2007. And in that year, in that time frame, for the first time, we noted about 15% of our submissions that year were young folks like you who were proposing double bottom line and triple bottom line business ideas. And we thought, oh, that was kind of interesting. And it was sort of a one-off observation. But each year, subsequently, we've noted a continual rise, increase in the number of for-profit and hybrid submissions. Now it's 50% of our pipeline every year. So, yes.
Expand what double and triple bottom line is.
Thank you, Jedi. Yes. So, and again, I sort of default to that jargon. But from our perspective at Echoing Green, we talk about double bottom line businesses being businesses that are looking not just for a social return on investment, but a financial return on investment. And triple bottom line are those businesses who are looking for both of those things, as well as an environmental return on investment. And we have really been sort of on the leading edge of this impact investing phenomenon, which is fascinating to us. And we've really sort of changed the way we do our business to accommodate these new business models. I would say the second thing is that sort of the most robust pipeline of applicants for us are either indigenous leaders, young leaders coming out of Africa wanting to start social enterprises, or US-based folks like you guys who want to go to Africa as an emerging market and start social enterprises. It is our hottest, most interesting pipeline of deal flow. It's fascinating. And some of us just got back from Johannesburg because we hosted our annual convening of our fellows community, and it was amazing just to see the energy and the excitement that's happening in the social innovation space in Joburg in particular, but across the continent. And Gemma does work. She just got back from Kenya after Joburg. It's really quite remarkable. You want to say anything more about what you're seeing on the ground in Africa or some of your observations?
I think a lot of what I'm seeing is, people, international people, really starting to listen to what locals already know, and really just acknowledging how much knowledge they have, how much more they can contribute, and how we go there in service rather than in like, I have this idea and I'm gonna do it. And a lot of those ideas now, because there's that kind of energy, is really feeding people on the ground, is to really start thinking about what social innovation can look like from their perspective and on the ground in their communities.
It's fascinating. And I would say the last trend, which is fairly new, and I'd be curious to see how it's playing out here on campus at Stanford, social innovation in many regards has been a conversation that has been very separate from more traditional social justice conversations. You know, you can get to positive social change through a variety of mechanisms, but for the moment, it's very interesting where you're seeing more coordinated conversations between folks in the social innovation space and those in the social justice space at a moment when racial equity issues are front and center through Black Lives Matter, when you've got people in the impact investing space talking about putting a gender lens in terms of investing in women entrepreneurs and providing more startup capital for women-led businesses. I think this is a very interesting moment where the intersectionality between race, gender, socioeconomic status, we have a real opportunity to have a robust conversation in the social innovation movement, which we're excited about. So those are some of the trends. And then maybe I'll say a couple words words about, my journey to this work for what it's worth, and then we can open it up for conversation. I think I, like a lot of people in my generation, sort of stumbled into social innovation work, because when I got a fellowship from Echoing Green in 1992, it wasn't even called a fellowship for social entrepreneurs. We were called community service leaders. But my journey started, I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. I'm the kid of 2 public school teachers. And for a lot of folks in the African-American community, education is the primary vehicle for advancement. I was the first person in my family to become a doctor, first person in my family to go to an Ivy League school. And I don't know what it's like for your generation, because I don't have any kids, but there were very prescribed pathways for success. Like when I came home and told my mom and dad that I actually wanted to be a historian, they were like, "What? Like, we took out loans for you to do what? It's doctor, it's lawyer, it's engineer. End of story." And so it was some tense times when a family who had sort of invested every bit of resource and time and effort into you, and you sort of want to step off the pathway of success as is traditionally defined, did not go over well. And for me, I, in my heart of hearts, knew I didn't want to be a doctor, but again, my guidance counselor sort of said doctor, lawyer, engineer. My mother, who was a guidance counselor, said doctor, lawyer, engineer. So that was what I understood. And I tried to avoid med school for a couple of years. I took my MCATs, and I took a year off and deferred. I took another year off and deferred, and I just couldn't figure out another way to defer. So I went off to medical school. And it actually was it was an enjoyable, interesting experience. But it was most useful to me because it was in med school that I met my mentor, who's now one of my closest friends and one of the people who had really changed my life and lead me to Echoing Green. In the late 80s, Boston had the 3rd highest rate of black infant mortality rate in the country, so the rate at which babies die before their first birthday. And Boston, despite having some of the world's best medical facilities, was only lagging behind Seattle, Washington, and Washington, D.C. in the death of black babies. And our paper of note at the time, Boston Globe, do you guys even read newspapers? So I guess you do everything online, but sort of above the fold in the Boston Globe was a 5-part series back in the late 80s called Birth in the Death Zones. And, I can still see it crystal clear. I had this image in my mind of a young woman who was probably maybe a few years younger than me at the time, kneeling before the grave of the baby she had just buried. And it's one of those things, we read tough stories all the time, and you sort of flip past it, you go on with your day, but every once in a while, your life changes. Your pulse quickens, you become obsessed with something, you don't quite know why, but you can't let it go. And for whatever reason, that story was my moment of obligation. Like, I never met this woman, I didn't know anything about her, nor she me, but she looked like me, she could have been my sister, my cousin, that baby could have been a member of my family, and I just said, I don't understand why that baby had to die, and for some reason, I got to figure out a way to make sure that no other babies who look like that die. And I don't know why it was, but it was my moment, and it was my calling. And I spent the next couple years, actually, because I didn't have an answer. I was in med school. I had taken some time off to go to the Kennedy School and was just sort of thinking about, well, if this is my obsession, if I wake up every morning, if I go to bed every night sort of thinking about this woman, thinking about this baby, and how did the system fail her? What was the matter, especially when a block probably or 2 blocks away she could have gotten state-of-the-art care, but started studying it and talking to people and found my way to an obstetric anesthesiologist, Nancy Oriol, my mentor, who was also sort of beautifully obsessed with this question of, how did it come to pass that this woman had to bury her child before she got to know her child? And so together we just started thinking about it and talking to people, and I think my story matters only in that, you guys get lots of information that come to you every day, and you are incredibly busy. You probably are engaged in lots of extracurricular, but take time to stop and listen. Your best form of data is in some ways intuitive data. It's your gut. So when something is pulling you to just sort of read a little bit more, spend a little more time thinking about it, pay attention to that. There's something very profound about your soul and your passion sort of bubbling up and talking to you. And if you take the moment to pay attention to it, it can be life-changing. It was for me. So I think that's one reason my story matters. And then I think the next thing, and I do worry about it with your generation, is you're so smart, you're so capable, you want to jump in. There's something about apprenticeship and learning and engaging in a community and waiting to be invited in and sort of building your bona fides and credibility to do that work. You know, when we started our program, the Family Van, we didn't just start it. We spent about 2 years going to potluck dinners in communities, talking to residents in inner city Boston, talking to healthcare providers, saying, here's our observation, here's what we think the community needs. And interestingly enough, our initial idea was to take doctors out from Harvard Medical School onto the streets of Boston, and the community told us no. They were like, how dare you? You know, we should have access and rights to care just like everybody else. That's not the right solution. And in concert, we co-created, I guess that's the term you guys use, we co-created a solution that didn't bring providers out into the community, but created a bridge that gave them ready access into existing services. And that took years of work. So sometimes you have to be led by the communities you serve. And I think that's another really important point. And I'm proud to say that the Family Van, the program I started with my Echoing Green Fellowship, is still in operation today, doing quite well. But it's been an incredible journey that led me to Echoing Green, because Echoing Green's model of investment in backing a leader, believing in you before you believe in yourself, embedding you in this larger community to travel along the road with like-minded social change agents is a really powerful offering. And it's, again, something I've never seen in any other community of which I've been a part. And then I think the last thing I'll say, and I don't think this was in the Work on Purpose book, and I didn't recognize this until a few years ago, that, you know, and I sort of talk about sort of the business card test. Like if I hand you my business card, it would say that I'm president of Echoing Green, it would say I have an MD, an MPP, but I think we sort of get stuck in sort of the traditional career trappings. I think your only job at your age and in this stage of your career is figure out how to marry your passion and purpose. I truly believe that each of us have unique gifts and things to give to the world that only we are capable of accomplishing, and it's usually not in the guise of your academic pedigree or a traditional career path. It's just something you're really good at, and you have got to spend these years trying to figure it out. And again, it took me way too long for me to figure out my particular gift or journey, but I sort of talk about myself as a cultural translator. Turns out I'm really good at sort of diffusing between very different worlds. And I think it stems from my upbringing. So again, African-American kid, grew up in Baltimore. My parents bought a house in one of the first neighborhoods to desegregate in Baltimore. And it was a Jewish neighborhood. So Jewish families helped integrate their community with African-American families. So I spent, you know, a lot of my time sort of traversing the boundaries of sort of a traditional sort of Catholic upbringing, celebrating Christmas with my family and friends, but also celebrating Hanukkah with my Bubby and Zadie who live next door, right? So cultural translation. You're talking about your hip hop work. I'm so old school hip hop. I'm like Sugar Hill Gang, Run DMC, Houdini, like old school hip hop. But I spent my afternoons in my high school orchestra playing violin, playing Vivaldi and Bach, but then rushing home to listen to, again, you know, Sugar Hill Gang and sort of that this newfangled music that totally sort of blew the mind of me and my peers in Baltimore, Maryland, sort of cultural translation. And then when I got to Harvard and Harvard Medical School in particular, living in sort of very elite, rarefied environment, like the ones in which you guys are navigating, spending my mornings in Harvard Medical School classrooms, but then walking across the subway tracks to some of the most disadvantaged communities in Boston and feeling equally comfortable in both. And that's cultural translation. And again, there's no name for it. I couldn't have gone to the career services office at my college and say, hey, I'm really good at this. But again, that's something you guys, that's the work you all have to do. And I think that is your only job to do at this point in your careers and your lives. And I think sort of the leadership of our country and in the world really depends on you guys figuring it out. So in some ways, my great hope is that social innovation is a vehicle for you guys to do the exploration. It's not about founding something. It's not about starting something. It's about using the opportunities and the platform that social innovation provides for you to figure out how to apply your passion and purpose and skill set in a particularly transformative way. So I went on too long, but I'll sort of end on that note and would love to sort of have a discussion, answer questions, or, you know, if something didn't make sense, just let me know.
Yeah, we have like 1 or 2 minutes left.
Oh no, I was gonna leave there. I'm so sorry, you guys. And I'll stay if people, jeez. So ridiculous. I should have my
Time
time.
for a handful of
Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was like looking at the clock. I thought I had plenty of time. Ridiculous. Yeah.
So when investors are investing in Echoing Green, do they know what they're investing in, or are they investing in just Echoing Green?
It's a great question. Echoing Green has evolved over the years. When we started, we were a fellowship program. So our one product was every year launching this business plan competition and then selecting fellows. So in the early days, you sort of knew you were investing in that fellowship process. But it's a little trickier than that, right? Because we don't fund based on issue area or geography. We're just looking for the best and the brightest. And maybe one year we'll fund someone doing microcredit in India. Another year we might not. So you have to sort of take the leap of faith as a donor that you believe in Echoing Green as an intermediary that's very good at sussing out and selecting this talent, and that has challenges and opportunities that are common to pretty much all intermediaries. But in the last couple of years, as social innovation has really evolved from sort of a field of endeavor to sort of a real bona fide social movement. Sort of the ecosystem work has become increasingly important to Echoing Green, and we founded a number of other programs within the Echoing Green framework to support the building of the ecosystem. And Rita knows one of our programs is Work on Purpose, because we've done some trainings here at Stanford to work with young people through a competency-based training to help you all think about how you identify the career trajectory that works best for you. And we're really proud of that work. We also have another program called Direct Impact, and we work with corporations to train some of their young talent to learn how to serve on boards, right? Because as next-gen leaders, being good civic leaders and understanding governance and how it works really matters. And they pay us for that, so that's a good earned income strategy for that. And our impact investing work, we don't take an equity stake in any of the businesses in which we invest. We provide essentially convertible notes, sort of cheap loans and patient capital. But we work with foundations to invest in Echoing Green to help build out the early stage ecosystem of impact investing. So we beg, borrow, and steal to figure out how to do it. But we are in the process of a fairly robust growth moment where we have, I don't know, quadrupled, quintupled our budget in the last few years to sort of meet the moment of social innovation. Interestingly, when Echoing Green was founded, we were a foundation, so we didn't have to raise money. We had one or two revenue sources, but in the last 12 years, we have shifted to become a 501c3, so we got to raise money, and we're trying to diversify our revenue streams to get to a level of sustainability. But it's a slog, it's hard, and this whole notion of the social sector and sustainability, or the lack thereof, because most of us never sort of achieve sustainability. The clock rewinds to zero every year, and you got to start. It's hard, and the philanthropic marketplace doesn't have enough capital. It's not rationally allocated. It's hard. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah.
It seems like a large part of what's helped you along your way has been holistic. So I was just wondering, was there anything you learned, from your classes, books, professors at college that has also helped you?
Oh, that's a great question. So I was a historian of science in college. My major, I don't know if they have it here, it was history and science. So study everything from, Newton to Aristotle, all that kind of stuff. So it was really interesting for me. But they required you to do a senior thesis. I don't know if you guys have that here, where you had to do sort of primary research. You had to be in the archives, looking at a lot of primary sources. And I studied the public health system among free blacks in pre-Civil War America. So for me, it was my first exposure to how to think about structural inequities that either burdened a community or supported a community. So for someone who approaches social innovation through a social justice lens, sort of understanding, what are structural barriers that prevent communities based on race, ethnicity, whatever, from getting access to services. How do you think about that? How do you identify it? And then how do you think about solutions to it? So I do think that a lot of that textbook learning and historical analysis was super duper important and transferable. But I also think the ability to get out into your community and do experiential learning, and I know has the Cardinal Quarter stuff here where you guys are out and about. I think that's really important. And in the early days of Echoing Green, we funded a lot of incredible young leaders who were doing work in East Palo Alto. So, for example, there was a Stanford student, just extraordinary, Priya Haji, who co-founded a group called Free at Last, which was one of the first community-based substance abuse treatment programs in the country, and which became a national model of how we treat those dealing with substance abuse issues. And that happened in part from Priya sort of leaving the classroom and going out into community and working with community leaders like her co-founder, David Lewis. So I think you got to get out and work in community and understand and learn. And I think, Rob, you can speak to that better than anybody because you started doing that when you were here as an undergrad, right?
Yeah, so the way that I got started was I was a sophomore and I was a history major here, and I wanted to be a sports writer, a sports broadcaster. And my primary ambition taking classes was that they not start before noon. So one of the classes that fit that criteria was a course called Poverty and Homelessness in America, taught by Alfie Maria, who's retiring right now. And it was a service learning class at a time that there were only 2 service learning classes on campus. And it had an internship component. I interned at a drop-in center for homeless teenagers in San Jose. And within 2 weeks, I fell in love. And that was it. And it's not that I knew I would spend the next 22 years of my life doing it, which is what's happened. But it was that I knew that something could grab me in a way that nothing in my life had ever done me before. And I think the thing that Cheryl mentioned earlier, a couple things that are so important, is one is to approach the work with the idea of humility and learning. I think the most annoying and potentially offensive and harmful thing that Stanford students are sometimes guilty of is having an idea that's really good in their heads or really good on paper and then quite literally imposing it on a community. And there's so many problems with it, but it happens every single year, and I don't think that's changed. And so don't let yourself be one of those people who in the midst of your own hubris, doesn't see that the best way of trying to address an issue is to really embed yourself and learn and understand, but not being so humble that you can't recognize that I might have something to contribute to the dialogue, I might have an idea that can improve it, but really walking that middle ground, I think it's hard to do, but it's essential. And then I think the other thing that Cheryl mentioned is there's such an obsession right now with starting your own thing. And if you were to look at it objectively, and let's say you said, I could start an organization that becomes $1 million organization that helps 1,000 people. Or I could go to work for a mediocre organization that's a $10 million organization. And I can make it 50% better at doing what it does. Where am I going to have the greater impact? But the problem is right now, everything is pushing you towards starting your own thing. And it's really been devalued to involve yourself in something existing and see what you can do to improve. And I know it might sound silly coming from me because I did start my own thing, but I think not feeling that pressure to create your own thing and instead saying, how can I best be of service? And always having that be the first question.
It's well said. Tomas, you have anything to add to that?
Just to add on to that, I appreciate that comment. And there's a term for it. It's intrapreneur, right? So it's this idea that there are social entrepreneurs, but also social intrapreneurs, people who can go into the public sector, the private sector, and make improvements. But I really appreciate that comment.
Right, exactly, yeah.
And I think on that, we have to end. Everyone, thank you so much for enrolling in VIP this quarter, and please join me in thanking Cheryl for this.